Ayin Beis, Volume 1. We finished chapter 74 and up to chapter 75 on page 140. But I want to review chapter 74 and just emphasize a few things that we covered but didn't thoroughly analyze. So the context, of course, is that we're in the process of explaining how the 5 or 7 levels in Birchus Yotzer from Elokei all the way through Mizgiv Ba'adenu are now a microcosm in Malchus of Atzilus. So to explain this, the Rabbi first began to explain what is Malchus, which of course in a sense gives us also, in effect teaches also what Malchus the Ein Sof is. Because that was not discussed before. Before, the discussion was that the 7 or 5 levels began with atzmus, the beta, went to Ein Sof, the rotzen, shir atzmi b'koyach, ak, akudim, atzilus, or bri yitzir asiyah the klolos. Basically, abiyad the klolim, atzilus bri yitzir asiyah the klolim, and the rotzen haposhet, which is before it. That's the 5. Baruch Shamar, and then the 2 preceding is Ein Sof and atzmus. Far easier to repeat than the ones in the tefillah, because there you need the explanation. But there we didn't discuss the power of Malchus. Here, in order to explain how these 5 exist in Malchus, you have to begin with what's Malchus, because ostensibly Malchus is the lowest of all the spheres. How suddenly does Malchus have all these high levels? So the first thing establishes in Perek Ayin Gimel and Ayin Daled the power of Malchus, and based on the Sefer Yetzirah notes Tchilas and B'Sefer. What's Tchila? Tchila is Kol HaTchilas, Kadm Kol HaKdumim. By the way, I saw from the Tzemach Tzedek, he alludes to the question you asked me about Elokei Elam. He doesn't ask it, but he says Elokei Elam is talking Elokei Elam. He makes it clear Elokei Elam, not Elokei of Welt, Elokei of. He brings a few psukim and rayas. I saw in the Tzemach Tzedek in the explanation of where did I see it? On Siddur. His explanation on Siddur. It's a different explanation than the one in Ayin Beis and in the Mitla Reb and Shari Tshuva. But that Elokei Elam, I'll show it to you afterwards. He explains the words, what the word means. He brings a lot from Avodraham. It's a pirush, it's a commentary on Tefillah. But going back to this, so what is Tchila? Tchilas here means Kadum l'chol hakdumim. That nothing has no beginning, has no end. Talking about the source. That is wedged into the Sof, which is essentially the purpose of it all. That's Malchus. So the 10 spheres are the instruments that make it happen. But the Kavanah, the purpose, the ultimate objective is Malchus, which is Yerid and Biyah, or as he says, Malchus has the koyach of hisna'asus that comes rooted in keser Malchus, and in turn carries the power of atzmus. So why is this critical? Because this sets the tone now, why you could explain that Malchus has in it all those levels before the Tzimtzum, starting from Elokei Elam. If not, Malchus is we could just call it the 10th sphere. So once we know that Malchus has that koyach atzmus in it, the koyach hisna'asus, now we can apply all these levels. And that's what he did in chapter Ayin Daled. So explain that Malchus, melech yochid, melech hakodesh, to beterem kol, adon olam asher molach beterem kol, all showing that Malchus is rooted in the hisna'asus atzmi, it's rooted in its root. Not the way Malchus and Atzilus, its root is in keser, all the way to atzmus. In other words, that type of, it carries the power of the source. Let's put it this way. Okay? The source here being atzmus, the power of creation. Oyr and rotzen, all the other levels, carry the power of giluyim. They don't carry the power of atzmus. They carry it as an agent, but they don't reflect it. The power of Malchus reflects it, like the yesh in a way. Just like the yesh reflects the yesh amiti, in the spheres gufa, Malchus is like the yesh compared to the 9 spheres. The 9 spheres would be like Oyr or Ayin compared to Malchus.
It's funny, we always talk about Malchus as having nothing, and all of a sudden it's compared to a yesh.
That's why it has that. That's exactly the reason. We're not talking about yesh as I'm only using it as an example that Malchus, the lowest of levels, the least gilui, that's the point. Yesh, not as in sensing itself as an entity, it doesn't sense itself. As the lowest revelation, it has the keser and koyach atzmus. That part of that's what I meant by not the yeshus of the yesh, not the ein le'ilah v'siba, because Malchus does feel its source, absolutely. Truth is, Malchus is altogether beyond sensation. It's more of a, like the moon. But that's the point here. So Malchus therefore has these levels, and that's why. And now he begins the explanation in chapter 74. I'm just reviewing it. So it said because Malchus does yesh bo koyach atzmus. Bottom of page 138. I'm just summing it up. Malchus, and that's Elokei elam. So that's the only way to explain. That's Elokei elam. If we wouldn't, now so we can understand how you can now use the power of Elokei elam in Malchus. So actually the whole thing becomes a little topsy-turvy in a way. Because before it's atzmus, higher than all the Giluim. Higher than the 10 spheres. Now Malchus, the lowest of the 10 spheres, has Elokei elam compared to Biyah HaProtim. Because it creates the microcosmic B'riyat Sirasiyah. Maybe this is connected to what we discussed, if you remember the keser, when he said Baruch Merachim al Haaretz. It could be that when you start thinking about what's the purpose of it all, in purpose, Eretz Kodma. In process, Shemayim Kodma. In process of creation, heaven comes first, just like Chochmah comes before binah, and binah comes before das. But if you talk about Kavanah, in purpose, Malchus comes first. Because that's the Kavanah, the purpose is earth. Meaning Elam Hazeh. So maybe, I'm not saying he's saying that exactly, but it's reminiscent a bit when you look in the sources of this element in it. But the bottom line is that Malchus does have in it this power of Elokei elam. That's level number 1. And he says, and then comes Racheim Rabim, and he says these are the 2 levels. Shmoi. We spoke about Shmoi. Here, Shmoi is the name of God, referring to yecholes atzmus. So the Shmoi, how it's encompassed in yecholes atzmus, meaning it's God's ability. That's all you can call it. So you can't even call it any entity. You can only call it atzmus, ability to produce something. So from that perspective, all it is atzmus ability. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter the product or the result. What radiates there, what dominates there, is yecholes atzmus. So that's Shmoi, the way it's encompassed in the source. And then there's the one step out of that, just like he spoke before about Erein Sof, right? We spoke from Bilti Mitzvah comes Erein Sof, Racheim Rabim in the macrocosmic interpretation. So in the microcosmic interpretation, what's Racheim Rabim is the second level of Shmoi. Kamoi Shuhu B'Hamshachav is Galus. How the name is now expressed. Basically, if you think of name, obviously a name has no value to the individual himself. That's one of the things I mentioned. It's only a reflection. You don't need a name for you. The name is only for someone else outside of you, which is one of the reasons shame is used as the description. We're not talking now that a name awakens the etzim of a person. We're talking now, in practical speaking, on a day-to-day basis, a person doesn't need a name unless somebody wants to call him by name. You don't need to call yourself by any name. You know who you are. So when you say shame by atzmus, you're really saying is atzmus has no need for it. But if you want to know what he's expressing, and a so-called relationship to something outside of atzmus, that's the name. So if you talk about the name within the essence of the person, it's completely like he said, Shmoi hu and hu Shmoi. For all practical purposes, it's the same as saying him, Ata. Ata and Havaya, like he said, Ata Havaya levadecha, Ata, Havaya, and all these things are the same thing. But Havaya in atzmus, it's atzmus is atzmus. Atzmus has names, fine. Where does it make a difference when someone else calls you? So if you call Eibishter by Havaya, you're talking about Midas Racheim. Keil Chesed. Anoichi has its meaning. So bottom line is that the names are all reflective of the source. But the source itself, the way the name is in the source, it's like Erein Seif HaKol, like you said, Shmoi HaKol, there, Hu v'Shmoi, him and his name are one, that's Elokei elam. That's the highest level. The second level is already now, the name at the same time reflects and expresses who, the person called by that name, or the entity called by that name. But now you're already talking about the expression of the name. So, for example, let's take a name here. Okay, Eliezer. So when I call you Eliezer, so you turn to me. So obviously you turn with all of yourself. That's you. The name Eliezer you were given at birth. If no one is in a room, you still have the name. But what is the name when it's colored within you? It's really insignificant. I'm not talking now what it says in Chassidus that the name is the channel for chayas. But I mean to you, you don't need a name. You don't need to call yourself Eliezer. Eliezer, wake up. Basically, your name and you are one and the same. Where does it see a difference when you see it when you're in presence of others? And others call you by a name, and that's the way they have a handle on you, so to speak. That's a calling card. So the name fundamentally is like two opposites. Again, let's not talk about the name carrying chayes. That's already at a much lower level, because Hashem made it that way that the energy travels through the name. I'm talking now just purely the name as a name of an object. That's simply it. Remember, when we talk about atzmus, he doesn't need a name to carry life into himself. So it's not. In the shame of atzmus, there's no such thing as a name, that God needs a name to connect his neshama and guf. There's no neshama, there's no guf. He's an etzem. So when you say a name of God, the only thing it has is either it has within himself it's insignificant, but it's there. But on the other hand, relation to something else. You call God, you call him by the name God, or you call him by the name Hashem, or the name Elokei, or whatever the name is. So basically, you could say there's two levels of name. The way the name is in the essence, and there, basically, it's irrelevant essentially, because it's one with the essence. And then there's the name as it is some form of description, and that's what he says is Racheim Rabbi. Doesn't explain it at length. He calls it etzma, but it's already something that is somewhat hamshachav is galus. Something has emerged. If you remember, atzmus is higher than Gilead and Helam. You can't even say he's hidden, he's concealed, or revealed. In you can already say, okay. Example would be, for example, I can meet you and I don't know your name. And then you tell me your name. It's relevant, because here I know your name, I don't know your name. When it comes to yourself, it doesn't make a difference whether you know your name or not. You don't need a name to identify yourself, basically. To speak to yourself, to be yourself, you don't need a name. That's the point. Again, I'm not talking about name and neshamas b'gufim. Obviously, all this is a mashal for atzmus. Clear? Okay. So, that's the second level. Racheim Rabbi.
Question though: if a person was by himself on an island, his knowing his name, he obviously doesn't need his name to call himself, but by knowing his name, he would say his name is Menachem. So, because we learn in Chassidus that reflects on the essence of his soul.
That's why I kept negating. I'm not talking about reflecting the essence. On atzmus, there's no such thing as reflecting the essence of the soul. Let's take away the human example. Let's go to atzmus. In atzmus, there's no issue about being on an island and needing a name to find himself. Correct?
Right.
Okay. So that's number one. We're talking here about atzmus. We're not talking about a human. If you talk about example in the human being, forget about the name. Let's call a name just a symbol. For all practical purposes, that's what it is here. It's just a symbol. It's just it's like putting a label on something. It's irrelevant to the discussion here that a name is infused with power. That's the point. I understand. That's why I qualified what I said. Because the bottom line is, when you talk about a name, there's another so-called sugya, a whole other discussion, that a name is like the channel that channels your soul into your body, and that's why a name carries the essence of the person, and when you call a person by name, you can awaken the etzem. That's a whole different discussion, and it's a whole different aspect of a name. But let's put it this way, a soul in heaven doesn't have a name. Yeah, your name is given to you by birth, by your bris, or by a girl, by a krisatar.
Wouldn't you say that in essence it still has it?
No, not at all. Because the soul doesn't need a name in heaven. It's only when it comes in the guf that it needs a name to channel it in. And the parents have a ruach hakodesh thing, that they know what the name is appropriate.
And once it goes back, the soul goes back up to Ganei.
No, because it did the avodah. No, but
by the Arizal and
no, you see, by Yisker we say the names of because once a soul has been in a body, remember, it never ends. The avodah that it did with the body now is for eternally imprinted in the soul. So the soul has now, it's not just we went through a station here. This world, that's why it's hisna'asus and everything. This avodah changes the soul dramatically. That soul is no longer that soul is no longer the way it came down. Now, additionally, Gilgal is another example. Gilgal, you don't go by the name that you came from. You go by the name of where you are now, what your parents gave you now. Even though Pinchas Elio, for example, it may have been a Gilgal Elio of Pinchas, or Pinchas of Elio, however you explain it. But the name is Elio because remember, a soul can channel. Remember, a soul is think of it like a projector of white light. The letters that give it so-called form and shape. At the end of the day, a name does not define the soul. A name may have, letters of a name are infused with power, but it's not the name that defines the soul. It's the soul that defines the name at the end of the day. When Aaron was called Aaron, it's because his soul came from Chesed, and his parents knew that, or they sensed it. So they knew that he'd be a kohen, so to speak. So Aaron is Lashon Oyer, Moshe is another story because his name came afterwards through Miriam, but his name, we're talking about the Hebrew name given by parents. See, even an example like Moshe, for example, what's his real name? What soul, what channel of energy? It's not so simple. Huh? There's a bunch of, huh?
Yeah, there's 10 different names.
10 different opinions. Yeah, 10 opinions, not 10 names. There's different opinions of what his name was. I've written up once, the whole of them. We don't even know them. That's another interesting thing, because she captured with Moshe. Chassidus explains Moshe captures an element of Moshe Rabbeinu. The point I want to make is, at the end of the day, even if letters of a name have power, that's because it's given power. The name itself fundamentally is not necessary for a soul. That's the bottom line. Energy does not need a name. It's another, but the Minamayim is that he comes from the world of water, hidden worlds. Minamayim, yeah. The point I'm making, but going back to atzmus, that's why I'm saying let's not talk about that aspect of the name, because that just confuses matters here. Here we're just simply talking about a name as being, like we say, hu v'shmo yechad. Him and his name are one. God definitely does not need a name for his essence. We also, as I said, don't really need it fundamentally. It just has power in it. So there's two levels. There's one level how the shmo is kolol, meaning how it's encompassed. That's Elokei elam. Or he doesn't really say that. He says Elokei elam is the keich atzmus, and then there's the shmo as it comes out revealed. I'm just reviewing that he says here. Okay. Oh no, it does say. So the same thing in Malchus, it has keich atzmus shu b'chin shmo yakol batzmusei, and it also has this galus Hashem. It also has the revelation of the name, and all of this both are connected to hisna'asus. Clearly, that it means everything. Both first two levels. Like he said earlier, Elokei elam beira. When you say God's a creator, it shows us and reflects for us the essence of atzmus, that he's mitzusim atzmusei, that he's kadmon mitzusim atzmusei, and built in mitzias nimtza, as we discussed.
So Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Eivishter what's his name. He said, "I'm going to give you a name with mercy. With Racheim or
Eya, you mean that one?
What should I tell him?
No, that's Eya. Well, basically, Moshe was not asking God if he has a name. He was saying, how do I describe you to the people? Obviously. Which means, how do we relate to you? A name is all about a relationship. At the end of the day, a name is a relationship. Even if it's a relationship with yourself, it's a relationship. Atzmus doesn't have a relationship. He doesn't need a name. But he wants a relationship. So therefore there is a name. You can put it that way. Yeah.
A name is about a relationship.
Right.
With atzmus, you don't need a relationship.
So but nevertheless, since atzmus, remember, we keep going back to the interface. Atzmus himself wants a relationship. So it's not just he sends us his name and he stays somewhere, his essence remains apart. He's expressed in that name. It becomes his name. That's why there's 7 holy names. They're sacred names. They're not just they're not just the door handles or handles to understand a piece of God, a faculty of God. They're actually names. Then there's Shema Etzem, Shema Vaya, Shema Etzem. Anoichi is even higher. Anoichi refers to Leis Ramas Leibeshum Israel. That Anoichi is the name that it's not expressed, even hinted, alluded to in any letter or this, but it's still Anoichi. It's still the word Anoichi. And when you talk about Eya, which may be the highest of all names, is essentially a description of atzmus as being built to mitzias nimtza, as the Rambam says. However you explain, Eya literally means I am who I am, but it really means I am because I am.
So that gave people something to relate to.
That's what we spoke earlier. Remember, atzmus, that he's a creator, you can allude, you can extrapolate that he must be different than we are. And his existence comes from himself, within himself. Yeah, the bottom line is, as we said yesterday, God is not on the couch. We are. God does not need a name. He does not need analysis. We're never going to understand God and the way God is exactly. But he wants a relationship with him. He wants us to understand him as much as we could. And some of it will come through Rusa Deliba, less machshava d'visabei klal, but the Rusa Deliba you are grasping. And all of it is part of the relationship. Just like everyone that's married knows, you only get that much of your spouse. Much remains a mystery. That doesn't mean that you don't have a relationship. Mystery doesn't always mean, in other words, it's only in our world that we need control. I need 100% control. In reality, control is not necessarily a virtue. Sometimes letting go is more important than control. I would say not sometimes, always. Because it's not about you. It's about accepting something greater than you. That's why a real keli, that's why it says God can't rest under the same canopy with a balgaiv, with an arrogant person. It's like the Kotzker Rebbe said, where is God? Wherever you let him in. You don't let him in, he's not there. Or he's in concealed state. That's the bottom line. So atzmus obviously doesn't matter. He's there, not there. He's not defined by being there or not being there. But if you want to have a relationship with God, you got to make some space in your life. That's what it comes down to. And space means that you cannot control it. That's really what it is. Now, okay. So then you go to Keichaz u'behelam v'izgalas Hashem u'shabah b'gili lahavis. Okay. In other words, he's explaining what does it mean. I'm explaining this chapter a little more. The atzmus u'behelam. In Malchus, it has the power of atzmus to create, but you could have the power that's concealed, it's just sitting there, latent, dormant. Dormant is like asleep, and latent is what? Potential. Just potential.
It hasn't woken.
So it's like latent is before dormant. Latent is pre-dormant. I think so. So a lot of that. So it's good for uru. Yeah, Mishinaschem. Yeah. Right. So the waking up from the sleep. No. But Malchus, example for Malchus in Tanya and other places is earth. That you see the earth has the power to produce vegetation because it's Malchus. So the earth can be a state of potential. You look at the earth, you may not even see that it has that power. And then it becomes activated, however it becomes activated, either through above or from below, meaning we plant seeds or the things that grow on their own through so-called rain. The natural growth, svichim or whatever you call it. She says like this. So there's the two levels in Malchus. Malchus has the level where the power to create, the potential, behelam. Ubizgalus Hashem. What is the Gili Hashem? Shem that's not kolol. That's already as it comes is expressed in a process of creation. So to go back to the two things I said about the name, remember here the name is reflective of God's power. It's not just a name, God's power. So the God's power within atzmus is there, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's activated or doing anything. And then there's a state where it's active. That's already what he calls barachamecha harabim, as opposed to Elokei elam. Elokei elam is describing a state of being. That Malchus has koyach atzmus, period. But that's it. Rachamecha harabim is an active state. In your abundant compassions, he's interpreting the tefillah of Yotzer olam. That's already the so-called the activated koyach atzmus, the activation of creation process. That's the second level. And now he says, "V'kol hu shekol b'atzmus adayin koyd mishabab gam b'bchinas rotzen lahavis." And this is all the way it's encompassed in atzmus still. Or you could say the atzmus of the way Malchus is encompassed in atzmus, or however you interpret that. Before the third level, which is when it will become actual desire to create. So you could ask a question in 1 second. If there's no desire to create, what gilu do you have? So it's an abstract level, but clearly it's not just the etzem. Remember we spoke about bilti mitzias nimtza, that atzmus is just in a state of non-existential existence. Eir is already some type of presence. So what we have is presence, yet we don't have a specific desire to create yet. You'd have here the presence of creation, so to speak. So it's a revelation, and not completely just the yecholes, the potential state, the ability. It's not just the ability to create, it's actually the creation power itself. And then comes the next stage where he actually has a desire for it, which will be Racheim aleinu as he speaks. Remember, these are all very subtle levels to understand so-called engine room of how the whole process began in its root. So when you really break it down, remember, in our interface, we want to be able to connect to every particular level. So more generally speaking, we would say, okay, a person has a potential, and then they actualize it. But as we know with the faculties, for example, you start first, all the faculties are in the etzem and nefesh. Then you have keser atzmi. Then you have keser hiyulim. Then you have keser nalamim. And then you have keser gluyim. Why do you need all these steps? Why don't you just say, from your deepest so-called essence, just comes out, you sit down, you write. Because it's not that way, because God wanted process in order for there to be an interface of connection. So if we just jump, so-called, from the unconscious power of the soul without these so-called steps, it would be the equivalent of a teacher teaching you a brilliant idea, but never teaching you how to get there. Or the process, how I got from here to here. So basically, the way we function is, it's all within the etzem. Then the etzem comes out to so-called, we'll call it a general expression. The general expression then comes into a potential expression. Potential comes into actual, but still all-encompassing. Then it comes into details, and then it enters into the specific structure. Similar to what we spoke about at Tzilas B'riyat Tziras here. First there's a vision, then there's an outline, then you flesh it out in detail, and then you have the full dimensional product. So in a sense, Chochmah is a spark, binah is fleshing it out, das is the full developed. Or however one explains that. So the bottom line is a process. So also in the source, it doesn't just jump from etzem to unconscious to conscious. It goes from etzem, which is completely beyond everything. Then that's like yecholes, the ability to do anything. Then comes the expression of creation. Maybe it's even the ability to create, whereas before it's just yecholes of everything. Let me see how he says yecholes. Where's the expression yecholes?
I mentioned that yesterday also.
It's in the previous chapter.
The ability to create.
Yeah, you could probably say that as well. You could say that yecholes is just atzmus, omnipotent or possible, everything possible type of ability. Then there's the yochid lehaves. That something now has emerged from the big atzmus picture, but it's very amorphous. What? Where are you reading? Yeah, right here. But okay, so it's still kol batzmusei. So then there's another level where then this precedes. This is kedem alei saratzen. Then there's going to be a level where the ratzon, there will become an active desire for existence. We're not talking about the nesava, we're not talking about things on the level of atzmus, we're talking now relationship. Everything is about relationship. In atzmus, there's no relationship. Atzmus, the taiva of atzmus, to have dir b'tachtenim, is all about atzmus. Period. But the taiva itself dictates that there should be something outside of atzmus that should connect to atzmus. So that taiva therefore creates a process of relationships. So nesava itself doesn't come because of relationship, not for the need for a relationship, or not even definition of a relationship. But the taiva is for a relationship. You can put it that way. And as such, we need levels. Because without levels, there's no relationship. So you need a level that finally will say, okay, now we want a desire for a building. So if someone asked you, why do you want that home that you're building? You'll say, I want a home to be comfortable, to be able to be myself. A place I can just express myself. Let's just say that's it. Someone said to you, okay, so what kind of home do you want? You say, I didn't really think about that. Whatever it is that's going to fulfill that. They say, but now we need to build it for you. So tell us something. So you said, okay, let me think about it. And you come back and you say, okay, I developed now my desire. Now I'm going to describe what my desire is. I want to have a home with 25 rooms, with 2 stables, 3 garages. Is that enough? That's a leis haratzon, exactly. Actually, I shouldn't even say that's a leis haratzon. A leis haratzon is that, because that's not even spheres. No, that's a leis haratzon is I have a desire for a structured existence. You're not even saying what the structure is like. That's what the desire is. Then comes a level shir atzmi b'kayach, where you envision what does this structure look like. 10 spheres, 10 hidden spheres. That's actually a very good example. So the same person, you ask him in purpose, in kavanah, in the beginning of the process, the details don't matter to him. Or let's put it this way, they're overshadowed by the etzem. Now, the truth is, in atzmus, even details matter. But the details, the way they are included in his nesaveh, has not a relationship with the details. The details are just simply the so-called the expression of his nesaveh. Which we all have this. It's the means and the end. There's a stage, like for example, when Moshe told Betzalel to build the Mishkan, so he said, build the containers. It says, first it says, he begins with the containers, and then he says, and then build the Urias. You see the order in Chumash. He starts with the adon and then goes through the containers. Then he says the Urias and so on and so forth. So the Gemara says, Betzalel says to Moshe, what kind of Seder is this? In this, the Seder ha'elam, that's what he says. The order, the process in the world is, first you build a home, a structure, then you put containers in there. Bottom line, what are you going to do with the containers? Where are they going to hang out? So Moshe says, Betzalel, whatever he says, you're correct, that's the way it is. So Chassidus makes a whole thing. What's going on here? Moshe didn't understand, first you build a structure, then you build containers. So it says, because Moshe is the visionary. He's interested in the kavanah. The kavanah is not the structure, the kavanah is the kelim. The work you're going to do in the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan, the Aron, the service, the karbonos. There's the 2 opinions. The Ramban says the main thing is the Aron. The Rambam says the main thing is the karbonos. But either way, it's kelim. That's the purpose. So Moshe began the kavanah, like what I said about V'shav Sa'aretz Shabbos L'Hashem. The Torah says you come to the land, right away make it Shabbos L'Hashem, and then it continues as 6 days. Betzalel, on the other hand, is the architect. He's the implementer. He's not the visionary. So he has to say how it is. What's the process? The process is we don't begin with the containers. The first thing we have to do is create a structure, Yerias. And then you bring the containers in. So this would be the equivalent, that the kavanah in atzmus is, like he says, Malchus. The end in mind. The end in mind is what is the purpose? There, all the details, the whole structure and how is insignificant. Then comes, but part of the relationship is that it should happen in a structured way, in a way that we can retrace the steps. So therefore comes step 2, where now, all the steps. Comes then a rotzen, then comes 10 spheres. In the spheres itself, you don't begin with Malchus. You begin chokhmah, binah, das. So bottom line is, there's process, where there's a means and there's an end, and then there's, when you think of it from the atzmus perspective, it's atzmus desire. Now, the end of the day, you'll ask the question, what happens once we climb the ladder and we get back there? Will we understand it from atzmus perspective? Absolutely. But then we'll have that ability to have seen both sides. We'll have seen it through the details, and the details will have been brought back to the etzem, and then we'll really have like what we call das tachten and das elyon together. That's what Mashiach is. That we see the big picture and the small picture at the same time. And you see how they really wanted to end. But there's no way to get there without going through the steps.
That's why we say yecholes before we say Baruch Shamar.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. Yeah. Then he goes on, and this is what I really wanted to focus on, the Biur Hazer. I studied it, and I got even more confused once I read it. It's usually the other way around. I understand what he's saying, but I don't understand how he's connecting it here. Because here he seems to be talking about very high level. Then suddenly he says, "V'yashlem de madrega alaf yal derech mashakosav b'Biur Hazer bolach." So I have the Biur Hazer right here. It's a beautiful Biur Hazer, obviously. It's the Alter Rebbe explaining the Zohar on Pasha Bolach. Mereish Tzurim be'inyan Mereish Tzurim areno u'migboyis ashereno. That's the expression there. This is Bilam's blessing to the Jews. So let me just tell you briefly what he says in Biur Hazer, and then we'll read it inside here, because when Bilam, one of the blessings he says is Mereish Tzurim Arenu, from the top of the stones, from the top of the mountains. I see you. Migboy is Asherenu. Migboy is a valleys, the way he describes. Huh? Giva. Hills or huh? Valleys or hills. It's definitely lower than mountains, that's for sure. No. Not maybe in the Sherish, but in the practically Givus is lower. He says here in the Zohar here it looks like it's valleys. It's valleys. A Giva is a valley or a hill? I think a Giva is a valley.
In the English translation, it translates it's a hill.
Giva, yeah. But sometimes we call a lower. But Emek is called a valley usually. Yeah, but Giva. Well, let's put it this way: compared to the mountain, it's definitely a. So he explains the Zohar like this. Well, first of all, the Alter Rebbe explains, and this is the Biur HaZohar, the Mittler Rebbe writing. I'm explaining Mashakasa Biur HaZohar, Bolok.
Yeah, we're 7 lines down.
On page 139. So basically, he says this whole Zohar. There's a Zohar that talks about that Mereish Shurim is talking about Chochmah, and Givos is talking about binah. So Chochmah, the taller mountains, the higher place, and binah is the Givos. And he's talking about how it gives birth to midas, to emotions. So basically, Chochmah and binah are like father and mother, and together they provide. The father provides the seed, the mother provides the egg and the womb, and together they give birth to a child, to children. In Ruchnius, this is Chochmah and binah giving birth to the midas. And the Zohar goes on to explain how all this is encompassed inside Chochmah and binah. And he explains briefly like this. Chochmah is the spark, is the nekudah, it's like the seed. In a seed, the midas are there, but you can't recognize them at all. Completely concealed. In binah is where the gestation takes place and the fetus develops. Same thing, midas begin to develop in binah. So the root is in Chochmah, but the development is in binah. That's what he says there. And then he goes on to explain that that's why you have a thing called midas sichlim. That in seichel, even though it's not emotional yet, but you could, when you're understanding something in detail, you can feel an emotion. The mind may relate to it more with chesed, or the mind may relate to it more with gvura, but it's an intellectual midah, means basically. It's an intellectual sensation, not an emotional one. Whereas in Chochmah, you don't even have that. Then he goes on and says, on the other hand, however, binah develops the midas, just like the child develops within its mother's womb. But because it's in its mother's womb, binah does not have the power to transform a midah. It only has the power to train and educate and allow an emotion to grow. So like he explains, for example, when you're a child, you may have, let's say, you're born with a nature of being very generous. That's the example he uses. As you grow older and you mature, that generosity becomes obviously full bloom. It blossoms. But that's not, you didn't change anything. You just took a midah as it's in its root, like a little sapling, and it grew into it, like what happens in the mother's womb. The seed, the child develops. What happens to change a midah, to transform it, instead of it being, let's say, driven by its own needs and desires, you need chokhmah, the bittul of chokhmah. That's what he says. So that's the mereish. That's the two things that's on merenu. That's why chokhmah is riyah erenu, and words asherenu. He calls asherenu is from the word more like he uses the word. It's like seeing something from a distance, not from close. Okay. Now, then he goes on and says like this. The Zohar uses an expression, and that's what Oishit Psiya Levar. The Zohar's expression goes like this. He says like this. This is the lashon of the Zohar, by the way. Koresh Srim Arenu, Tsiyura v'diyukna da'avoy israshim be mamish. Meaning the image and shape of Chokhmah is literally engraved in there. That's Meresh Sur Merenu. Umayhi Zimna, Tehus B'ma de Ima Mesitra Dila, and from there emerges the mother, in the mother, the B'mei de Ima, in the mother's womb, from her side, and then he goes on, Ismatzach ve'eshit p'si lebar, and from there, within the mother's womb, extends a p'si lebar, a small step outside. So he explains, the Alter Rebbe explains, what is this eshit p'si lebar? He explains that just like when you look in a fetus as it grows in the mother's womb, you don't just have a seed. You begins to develop into a full-bodied thing. So it's still uber yerachim. It's still included in binah. The midas are still in binah, but you can already recognize distinction of developed organs and so on. So there's something that's already, even though the fetus is still inside the mother's womb, you can already recognize something that's going to ultimately be separate from the mother's womb. That's the p'si lebar. Well, upon birth, it'll be full-fledged. The child will emerge, and a midah will be born. But even before the midah, even before the child is born, you already see the development. In chachma, in the seed, you see nothing. The moment of conception, all you see is a seed that's fertilized. Or before that, you just see a seed. It has potential. The seed carries in it everything, the genetics of the child, and so on and so forth. But as the fetus develops, you start seeing a p'si lebar, that's some type of expression outside. So now here's the question: what does this mean? So initially, in Biur Hazayah, this is all to explain these 3 lines here. Initially in Biur Hazayah, he says, you know what this is? He says this is how the midas begin to express themselves, even though they're still in binah. And he uses an example. He says like this: the sphere is structured like this. Yud is chachma, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hey is binah, Vav is midas, and the last Hey is malchus. So here's what he says now. Yud is chachma, that's the seed. Everything is in there, but there's no p'si lebar. A Yud is just a Yud. A Hey, when you structure a Hey, you have a right leg, a left leg, then you have the left leg. A right leg, a top and a right leg, and the left leg that's split with the space, right? The Hey. The bottom of the Hey looks like a tuf. Actually, he makes the image in Biur Hazayah. What's the bottom leg of the Hey? So it's not just a line, it's not just a Vav. It's a Vav with a little twist on the bottom. That twist,
like a backwards Yud.
That twist, right, like a backwards Yud. That's like putting one foot forward. So it doesn't look just like a leg, it's a leg moving forward. He says that is the midas beginning to emerge in the Hey of binah. That's how he explains it. Hold on. So then, at the end of the piece, however, in Biur Hazayah, he goes on and says, we still need to understand this. Adayin ein misyashiv. Because according to the Lashon, in the Zohar, Pirish Levar, Matzmusei, Levar, it says it's a step forward. In the Zohar, where's the forward here? Where do you see something forward? For example, in the fetus, there's not like a leg coming out of the mother's womb, God forbid. It's all inside. Yeah, but he's saying from the language labar, the expression labar means outside of. He's saying it means that there's something more than just what's there. So here's how he answers the question. I'm just telling you how he explains it. So he says the pirush amiti. This is the language here. The true meaning in labar, in the step, is that it's talking not about midas. It's talking about malchus. That's what he says here. Malchus hakula by gambi yese vov. Gambi be yese vov, yeah. Bebet nima. And what is malchus? We said malchus is the lower hay, but the lower hay is included also in the higher hay. That's the step forward. And what does he say this is? This is speech. In Ruchnis, this is speech. You're already expressing outside of yourself. Midas, at the end of the day, is your feelings. Compared to intelligence, midas is so-called to another. But speech is actual expression. When you want to really express, saying words to someone else, and it shouldn't just remain in your thought, that's what he calls machshav, that's what he calls malchus. The way it's included in binah, that is that step forward. And that's tfuna, ben and bas. That it has both a ben and bas. Ben are the midas, and bas is malchus. all encompassed in its mother's womb, which is binah. And this is what he says, Yolda Bas V'tikra Shma Dina. That's after the giving birth to the 12 tribes, or to some of the tribes, then Dinah was born. That's Malchus. Okay. That's B'chinas HaPsil Levar Shebetech HaAlef HaResheinish Shel Shem Havaya HaHei Resheinish Shem Havaya Sheneim is Al Sheirish Mechzav Mesias Nukva Dezah Nikra B'chinas Dibra Elyon Kidur. Yeah. Now, all this is somewhat esoteric, so let's explain what all this means in simple English. And then we'll go to read it how he's saying it here. Malchus is the power, as we said, to create. Middays don't have a power to create, nor does the mind. Malchus has the power to create. The power of atzmus. The power of the earth. The power, right? Okay.
Just like the woman has the power to create, right?
Correct, but the woman doesn't create, she carries. That's the thing. Binah carries. Yeah, but the creation really is coming from keser. That's really the truth. Keser, which is in Malchus, is the creation. Even Chochmah is not really the force of creation. Chochmah
is a desire, so without the Zacher's desire, he doesn't create anything. It's the same idea.
No, it's not the same idea. I would not say that. No, I would not say that this is... Keser is beyond Zacher and the kever. Keser is the source.
But Keser is a desire.
Desire doesn't create. You need a force of creation. If God didn't give us a blessing that we could give birth to other children, we wouldn't. With all the desire in the world, it wouldn't help. Desire does not create. Desire helps the process to begin the process, but creation is a gift. Malchus is the creator, but Malchus gets the power from keser.
Direct, not through.
Yeah, through all the steps. Fine. That's all. Through the steps. That's fine. Yeah, but here's the thing. Here's what he's saying. And I think now I've answered my question with Bir Hazer, why he's bringing it. Anyway, as far as the Bir Hazer goes, before we get back to Ayin Beis, the vort is like this. Let me just see one thing here. This is the Alter Rebbe said it, but the Mittler Rebbe wrote it. The Mittler Rebbe published this. He has an introduction that every Friday night the Alter Rebbe was known, he would say a bir in Zohar. And he says that every Shabbos we saw the Alter Rebbe studying and reading Zohar page by page very slowly and very in depth. Yeah. I just want to see one thing. Okay. So he says basically like this. Letters, when a child is born, they already have letters in their soul. But it doesn't come expressed until a few years. So binah is the one that ultimately develops. The binah develops in the child, the letters begin to develop. But they're there already. Malchus is dibur. Malchus is the ability to go out of yourself and do something outside of your entity. So that is rooted in binah. And the aces are rooted in the nefesh, in chochmah even, but the expression comes through binah. So what is the psiyah? What is the small step?
Expression comes through Malchus.
Yeah, but it's born in binah. It's developed. It gestates. It develops within binah, like in the mother's womb.
That's why a fetus understands speech.
Could be, yeah. So what is the psi? He's saying, how is it in its mother's womb? How is it in binah? This dibur. The dibur is then just one step forward. That's what it is. It's not yet. You can't call it a step, a full step. You can't call it an independent speech because it doesn't have speech yet. But you can say that in it has been born already the potential to go outside of itself. Whereas midas and midas za, which is ben, or in the case that he says vav, that's the vav. Za is the vav, or sometimes the vav within the hay. Is the vav within the hay. That is, he does not call psiyah labar. That's the ultimate explanation, because you can't really call that outside. So it's true, compared to Chachma, the whole fetus is already a developed state, but Malchus, the element of reaching outside of itself, is that small little psiyah labar. That's what he says. So now we have that the root of Malchus is in binah. That's the bottom line. So now let's go to the Ayin Beis. So what is he using this for? He just said that we have in keser malchus two levels. One is Elokei, the other is Racheim. One is the power of creation. The other is some revelation, even before the Ratzon. So he's saying, that's what he's trying to explain. He's saying v'yesh leimer, that this first level, I'm not sure what first level he means. Which that this first level, I guess it means Malchus means Elokei Elam, is al derech what it says in Zohar. What does it say in Biur Zohar? So he says now, let's read now. He extends a step forward, a step outward. This is, what is the step forward, as I just explained? This is the root of the letters of the word of dibur, of speech, Sheba Malchus, the tfuna, as it's rooted in Malchus within binah. Hanikra machshava seichel. This is called machshava seichel. Seichel itself is intelligence. Machshava seichel, the thought of intelligence, is considered to be dibur, the words within the mind, within intelligence. What is that? That's the level of Malchus within tfuna. So take away Malchus, you don't really have an expression outward. So it's already born within binah. He says the vav he's talking about here is the vav of the letter Hey. That letter vav, before it has that step forward, remember I said before it has the twist on the bottom, that's Zah, that's Midas. And the step forward, that's binah. That's Malchus rather. And the step outward, that the Eshit, that it goes outside of the essence, it's rooted also in binah. So now, how is he applying it here? V'hainu is still the language there. V'hainu rak shemishave sheirish shemakol mitzvus eitzir shel dibur. In binah, it means it's only created the root and source of these letters of word of speech. Achadayin ubchinas iskalos, but it's still all encompassed in binah there. Ki b'chinas zah shekol bim nikra midas shebesheichel ki yudua, because the level of zah, the midas within binah, are called midas of seichel within seichel. B'chinas psi lebar matzmus b'chinas machshava seichel. And the step forward, the step outward from the essence is called the thought of seichel, which is already the expression of seichel, like speech, like letters. So here's where I was, my dilemma. Okay, we understand what it means in Biur Zohar. How is it applied here, and how does it help us here? That's the question. How is it helping us understand what he's saying here? Then he goes on and says, I'm going to get back to it in a minute. Umadrega habe is the second level. And the second level is how Malchus is already in Midas, the power to reveal, not in binah anymore. Bottom line is, what he's saying here is that these first two levels, Elokei Elam, in Malchus, and Racheim Rabim, are compared to these two levels. What I was disturbed by, and I'm still not clear, he's speaking on such a high level. He's saying it's the power of atzmus to create. And it's the shmoi, the yecholes, how it comes out and is revealed. And suddenly, now he's bringing it all down into levels within chokhmah, to binah, zah. So my thinking is now, I'm just realizing that it could be like this. Because afterwards he's going to say the third level is keser sheba malchus. So what do we have here? We have binah in malchus, malchus within binah, we have malchus within zah, and we have malchus as it's from keser. So it could be that basically he's describing it on a lower level, basically three elements inside of malchus. Malchus, which is going to be the power to create outside of itself, like dibur, like speech, it's rooted in binah. That's level one, that's Elokei Elam. Level two, Racheim Rabim, is the so-called, its revelation is already how it is in Zah, in Midas. So Seichel, even though the letters are born there, but Seichel is still somewhat apart. Midas, your feelings, Midas are closer to speech than this Seichel is, basically. Because it's more zulas, it's more related to another. And then he says, the machshava seichel, which is, we're talking about the letters within binah of Malchus, even though it has letters, they're still bound in the expansion of the idea. B'miyut haskalah is bechinas dibur sheb'machshava. So here's another example for the second level. When you think of these words, adon olam, and the seichel is diminished, then it's dibur sheb'machshava. In other words, machshava seichel is like machshava sheb'machshava, like dibur sheb'machshava, and this is already dibur sheb'machshava. It's a lower level. Okay. In other words, basically, the way dibur, the letters of dibur are in binah is high, is more amorphous and more encompassed than the way the letters of binah are in midas, in zah. And then comes third level, the Racheim aleinu, makif, keser Malchus, the keser Elokei. What I am most bothered by is I thought it would be the other way around. Elokei olam is the highest level. Here it appears that Elokei olam is binah, Malchus and binah. Racheim is Malchus and zah, and then suddenly he's moving to keser.
That's keser.
Keser Malchus. Maybe that's the meaning. It's keser Malchus. It's not. It's that way. So maybe you're right. It's going the other way around. So in other words, Malchus, its root begins in binah. That's where it begins to develop. It's the psiya levar. The next step, Malchus, is zah, and then comes the keser that infuses and informs Malchus, the ayin that infuses teva with reima musat teva, that elevates teva to higher than teva. Yeah, that's the way. You're probably right. And then that's how he concludes this chapter. I'm not going to read it again. I'm just going to say here, he talks all about Rachmanis Racheim aleinu. That's level 3. Racheim aleinu, which in the macrocosm, if you remember, Racheim aleinu was shir atzmi b'keich. He's already envisioning a defined structure. So here, Racheim aleinu is keser Malchus, how the ayin is informing the ani. Malchus is ani, and the ayin of keser, the bittul, is like he says, it's like miracles that are manifest in nature. So they elevate nature and they reveal nature as being they reveal the godliness within nature. And same thing when we meditated, we contemplated, the same thing is true in our feeling. That we sense that compassion, we see how lowly we are. Remember he said Rahmanis comes only from a level of keser, because when you're exalted, you see how the lowliness of something, so you have compassion on it. Same thing when we meditate on our state of how great God is, we see where we are and how distant we are. That arouses a compassion on our souls. And that brings the fourth level, adenu zenu, that you have and compassion is higher than than immanence. Then you have adenu zenu that gives strength to the soul that comes from the Racheim. It gives strength for us to be able to leave our lowliness and our distance, as we shall explain. That's how the chapter ends. It's a little dense because of these levels. He didn't mention me this. No, he did. He mentioned it, but only only briefly. The bottom line is.
Is this all in the first?
The bottom line is you have to just remember one thing I need to clarify because it may confuse. You know, there are people when you talk Chassidus. There's two parts. There's what we call haskalah and we call aveda, right? You hear the expression haskalah and aveda, right? I want to just say one important thing about it because it'll help understand this. Haskalah just generally means like, intellect. Say maskil is an intellectual. And an avid is a person who works on himself. The Friedrich Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab and all the Rabbi made a big fuss about people who are maskilim and not avidim. They actually very denigrate that approach, that attitude. Friedrich Rebbe even has an expression that a maskil walks on his head and an avid walks on his feet. Basically, a maskil, because in the mind, it could all stay in the mind. And there's very sharp sikhs from the Rebbe Rashab, Friedrich Rebbe, about people who just learn chassidus and don't work on themselves. They could be brilliant philosophers, but there's not one drop of refinement. They were very negative about it. I remember a sikh in the Tavshem Mem Zayin. I can tell you where it is. Vayetze Yud Kislev. The Rebbe spoke about the Mittler Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe Chacham and binah. And the Rebbe said there's something very interesting. That there's an inyan in haskalah of Chassidus itself also. Even though it was always known, you can ask the question, if the Rabbeim are so negative about haskalah, why are they taking on this haskalah trip here? This is they should tell you, go work on yourself. You have pages and pages. This isn't easy material. It's exert. So it's not pshat. The Rabbi said, no, don't use your mind. Don't stay in your mind. That's the point. But obviously, Chabad is based on, as we're seeing here, the interface is bringing the mind is what helps us understand God. Take away the mind, we serve our master, but that's only service. You want to integrate, you need to appreciate, and to appreciate requires some type of intelligence. But you can't stop there. It can't just be an intellectual exercise, a mind game. It has to come into action. But the Rebbe spoke there very strongly how Haskalah has its own, as in a certain element, has an end in itself. And it does say in some places in Chassidus that the Haskalah actually refines your mind. When you're learning Chassidus and you're not learning something else, you're actually learning about godliness, and it elevates your mind, and inevitably refines you as a person. It makes you a more refined person. Obviously, that's not sufficient. Then you have to bring it down to davening and to aveda, because that's where it comes down to the real hard work of implementing it. But it's a lot deeper than that, because that way, you see, okay, two worlds, Haskalah, aveda. Almost like, in university you have philosophy and psychology. It's two different courses. I have always understood, and especially the more you read and the more you learn, that the truth is there aren't two worlds. The Rabbeim were coming to negate those that think there are two worlds. They never meant to say there's really two worlds. There's one world. There's one God. He manifests in seichel, and he also manifests in midas, and also manifests in action. There's no three gods. There's no two gods. We make that mistake because we live in a world of duality, so we can get stuck in our heads and not bring into action, like Bertrand Russell said. They asked him, how could he behave unethically? He's a professor of ethics. He said, I also teach mathematics, and I'm not a triangle. It's brilliant. It's a classic academic statement, which means you're not what you teach, and what you teach is not necessarily who you are. What does the Rambam say? You want to know who a Chacham is? You have to look at his actions. How he eats, how he drinks, how he does businesses, details. Not that any of us are perfect, and not that any of us, we all don't live up to our ideals. Our ideals are always higher than our actions. That's a rule. That's why they're called ideals. But we don't justify it and turn it into a philosophy to say, like the Rebbe once said, we all have flaws, but don't make your flaws a philosophy. We don't turn it into philosophy and say because we don't always live up to our ideas, that's why it's good, and that's why it's healthy, and that's the way we should be. So that's what we aspire to. But in truth, if you really think about it, it's not like God is more seichelic than he is emotional. And I'm a bas seichel, I get God. God is as distant from seichel as he is from emotions, as distant from everything. But he wanted to manifest in seichel. So seichel really, if you really think about it, is godliness dressed up in a garment called seichel. That's really what it is. And that's why Chachma senses it. Chachma senses the beyondness of intelligence. That's why it has bittul. Like he says in Tanya, in chapter 35, in the Haggadah, he says, Chachma senses hu levad ve'ein zlosa. There's nothing but him. True wisdom brings you to bittul, not to yeshes. But a yesh that's going to use wisdom, obviously, is going to become more of a yesh. But if you're really thinking about ideas that are beyond you, that should break you less of a ego, not more of an ego. That's why it says in Chassidus, when you learn science, you learn about yourself and learn about the world, you become a bigger yesh, because you're learning the wisdom of you, how great I am, or how great I can become. But when you learn godliness and you're learning the root of it all, you really actually should humble you and say, what am I? One idea that comes into your mind is coming from a reservoir of infinite ideas from a place that's beyond ideas. It's all, like he says, all a reflection of a reflection of a reflection of God's name, which has no connection to. It's not meant to teach us how low we are. It's meant to teach us how great God is, and don't consider yourself and once you know how distant you are, you can then become close, obviously. My point that I'm trying to make here is that Haskalah and Aveda, if I created a school, I would not call one the department of psychology and the department of philosophy. It's a department of truth. And emes, and reality, has two ways. It goes, one step is, it's like two chambers. It travels through the chamber of the mind, and travels through the chamber of the heart, and then it travels through the chamber of action. But it's all one thing. Why am I saying it? Even though I think it's relevant in general, it's very relevant to our discussion here. Because till now we've been learning it all in Haskalah. we're learning what's the level of atzmus and what's the level of Elokei and Racheim and where does the desire arise and what levels desire, and then the details in the desire, then the tzimtzum and ak and bri yitzir and asiyah and all that. We really want to appreciate that. You have to think of it. What is its impact on my avoid at each of those levels? Then you really get into understanding it. Here in this chapter, he's already beginning Malchus. He's already talking about it. You can see it's weaving it together. He's no longer just talking Haskalah here. He's talking here also how it has an impact on us. And I'm mentioning it because it could be confusing because he's like changed channels, but he's not really changed channels. Because the Rebbe Rashab knows that when he's talking the intellectual ideas, he's also talking about avodah.
The little foot of the hay.
Right. So the point exactly. So the point is that all these levels, like he said, they're in davening. He's not just being a mathematician here and saying, okay, this level fits this level. This fits. You're talking about 5 different levels of impact on our lives. And remember, it all began with the impact of transcendence on our lives. That's the key. Immanence, as he says here in this chapter even, he says, from immanence alone, from the immanent energy, you're not going to have compassion on your soul. Like when immanent energy is when you look at the world, you see, oh wow, the beautiful design that God created. You see Mamala Kalaman. You see God gave me life. I bench after a meal. I thank God for giving me food. It's all about God. It's all about you. But how God relates to you, which is a great level, because a lot of people don't even do that. They're just completely self-absorbed. So here you're taking the self and saying, my self is blessed. I've been blessed with children. I've been blessed with food. I've been blessed with parnas. I'm blessed with life. Every morning I thank God for giving me a neshama, for giving me my power to breathe, for giving me das. So you're basically acknowledging the godliness within existence. Fine. That's a critical first step. But you don't have anything that gets you out of the system. Transcendence you don't have. You have transcendence, but all the fierach proportionate to your system. As I said, that's already, for many people, that's already an achievement. To make a bracha and say, thank God they gave me food, is better than just fressing and thinking that yourself, everything's about me. But then, he says here, but from there, you don't sense the shiflus v'richuk. I'm talking about the end of the chapters, the lowliness and distance. Lo yochel eir alakil is galus by b'chinas pnimi. Meaning, because yeah. Because now, however, when you start sensing that Malchus, that the creation comes from a level that is beyond existence, and not just it's commensurate to your being, then you sense the distance and you sense your lowliness. And that is something that cannot be contained in pnimi, and that's where you need Rachmanis, compassion. Compassion, which is makif, something transcendent. You're not going to have compassion for yourself if you just think, you know what, I'm a healthy guy, I eat, I drink, and I thank God. I'm fine, I'm a good Jew. Compassion can only come, why is there compassion? When you sense, 1 second, I'm comfortable in Golos, but there's a whole dimension that's missing here. God is beyond me. Even if I'm comfortable, and even though I find godliness in my existence, compared to that which is beyond, I'm really on a very distant level, and we're in deep Golos. And just because I'm comfortable doesn't mean I'm not in Golos, so to speak. And that's Ma'erir on makif. That's Racheim aleinu.
What about also that step about makif?
That requires, when you sense that there's something beyond, then you sense how low you are, then that evokes a rachmanis. Now there's a compassion for this soul. Even a healthy human being on earth with everything, it needs compassion from a higher transcendent level. Because we need.
So the orpnimic teferes, which we call Rachman, is lacking still. That.
No, not Rachamim. We're talking about pnimi.
What's that? So how do you explain that? Least fellows go b'chis or panimi, you go alav b'chis or makif.
Lo yuchala. Read the first line. Lo yuchal Elokei galas. Because of his lowliness and his distance, the immanent energy cannot be revealed within himself in an immanent way, in a revealed way. So that's why Yovei alav b'chis makif. So it comes to him in a form of makif as compassion. He said, like earlier, he said, when a person is, let's talk a human being, when a person is, let's say, a Moshe Rabbeinu, a Rebbe, because of his exalted level, he can have compassion on you, because he sees where you stand, and he feels compassion. And he's mamshech makif. If he's on your same level, he's not going to feel compassion, because he's the same. There's what's the compassion? Compassion comes from a place that's beyond a makif dika thing. So that's what he's saying. Racheim aleinu. When we say, God, have compassion on us, you're saying that our state is much lower than yours, and we need your makif. Yeah. So bottom line is that what we're getting from all of this is that you're getting both the Haskell and Rabbi that he's talking about now, that these levels that we're talking about, starting from Elokei Elam, when we say God, Elokei Elam, God the creator of existence, that is atzmus, beyond us all. Malchus has that. B'rachamecha harabim, in your great abundant compassions, meaning in your state where you have now manifest as a creator, as Ein Sof, as the shame, as the Malchus in binah, that little step. Racheim aleinu, have compassion on us. From that level, come into the next level and have compassion on us. In other words, what you're having is an atzmus that's beyond it all. We're drawing him closer to us, basically. We're saying that in our davening.
We should have God's best wishes.
I'm saying, Racheim aleinu, have compassion on us. Compassion on us, meaning bring those levels into a shir atzmi b'keich, into envisioning us. Malchus as it's in Zah now, in Midas. Okay? Right? That's Racheim aleinu, or did I skip a level? No, I did skip a level. One second. How's it go? Elokei Elam, Elokei Elam, b'rachamecha harabim, Racheim aleinu. Right. So have a desire. I did not shir atzmi b'keich. 1 second. No. So the two levels. I'm sorry. So the Elokei Elam, the way that Elokei Elam, I made a mistake. Elokei Elam is the way Malchus is in binah. In binah, right. Where there's already some. You have to say that. Yeah. The second level, Malchus is in Zah. That's all Rachamecha harabim. Right. And Racheim aleinu, yeah. So that level, Racheim aleinu, now so-called shine on us or compassion on us, that's the makif of yechidah. The first two are not a makif of yechidah, not even makif. They're the root of makifim. This is already a makif yechidah. Have compassion on us. That's keser malchut. What does that mean? That infuse us with something that's transcendent. Infuse the nature with something that's miraculous. Reveal, because nature alone, as I said, is fine. Nature reveals, but it doesn't reveal anything outside of the system. Reveal that which is beyond the system within the system, which reveal to us that transcendent element which is evoked through our distance and through our lowliness. That's basically what he said. And that in turn, adenu zenu, becomes the master of our strength, that gives us strength. That's the last thing, that gives us strength to get out of this darkness, to get out of this lowly state. Remember, it's one feel, it's one flow. So it's basically, we're evoking from the root, from the source, all the way to the makifim, this is makif of yechidah, to basically makif of chaya. That's as far as he's gotten now. We've not gotten yet to makif of nefesh, neshama, ruach, and nefesh. Tehiri law, depends what you mean by tehiri. If tehiri law is which level by use tehiri law? Tell me the level and I'll tell you what it is. Makif yechidah, this is makif in Malchus. Makif tehiri law is Racheim aleinu. Am I right? No. 1 second. Makif of yechidah is no. Makif of yechidah is the rotzen, right? Yeah. Makif yechidah, rotzen. That's Racheim aleinu. Correct. Adenu zenu is the shir atzmi b'koyach. It's still the 10 hidden spheres. It's still chaya. It's all before the. Yeah. Well, so bottom line, what I'm trying to say is, to really understand this, you have to really, applying it. It's not just, okay, we know the levels. Now, the question is what the impact of these levels on our lives. That's the whole thing began with that. Remember, the whole thing was, how does transcendence impact on us? So he started first, transcendence impacts on us. We talked about the transcendence of Ak, Tehira Tata. That was the impact on us in the faith, Amunah, Pshuta, the Mesiras Nefesh, the bittul of Balarotz and Asur V'Nishma. That was Ak. Then we spoke about the effect of the transcendence of Tehiri Allah, which is the transcendence of before the Tzimtzum. That effect was the body, Mesiras Haguf, that we were able to, the bittul of the body, the keser, fasting, Yom Kippur, where the body is. Then he spoke about the effect of Atzilus on us. That's the hidden love, the desire we have for godliness, the thoughts of tshuva that come to us spontaneously. Then he began, to understand now the effects of the other makifim. So he went back to the source and started again, speaking how it comes from Elokei Elam, or from Baruch Shamar, and all the levels. And now he's bringing it back that it's all within Malchus, and it's all one mesh together. That's why I'm trying to spread that apart. The bottom line is its impact on our lives. That's what it comes down to. What is the impact? So you have to really break it down. Each of the levels has an impact on us. Like he asked the question, what's the impact of Elokei Elam? Elokei Elam is basically complete bittul. That you there's only atzmus and that's it. And then it comes down. But here he's saying Elokei Elam, Racheim aleinu, because that's the way we read it. God, the Creator, in your infinite or abundant compassions, have compassion on us. Be the master of our strength. Tzur mizgavenu. By the way, tzur, Tzemach Tzedek explains tzur is connected to tzurim, to this Bira Azayah, but he doesn't get there yet, so I don't want to confuse matters. Tzur mizgavenu, be the rock of our whatever strength. Magin Yishenu, be the shield of our salvation, and Mizgav Badenu, be the tower of for us. So this is all one flow, but each level is another impact of transcendent energy, depending on which level of transcendence on our existence and our souls. He right now covered the first four, basically. It's not really the first four. The first two cannot really be considered. The first two is atzmus and Ein Sof. Or what he uses here, Shem HaKolol and Shem HaGoli. Or if you want, Malchus in binah and Malchus in Zah. Then comes the 5 levels of Yechida, Chaya, those two he explained here. That's Racheim aleinu and adon zenu. And then he's going to, the next chapter, which I don't think we're going to get to, is going to go into adon zenu. He's going to elaborate more on this level that we just described. And then he's going to move to the other 3.
At the end, you say the whole question.
It's interesting journey. What can I tell you? I'm just thinking about it. Wow. Because you see, until now, we were able to get away until chapter, I would say, 69. We get away of speaking only the haskalah of it. Because he was talking about the structure, laying out the spheres, the immanent energy as the spheres sagnuzas. Even though it's clear that it's all coming to teach us how to connect to the divine, but here he's already bringing it into avodah, so it gets far more complicated.
Yeah, but he's still going malchut.
Absolutely. That's how he's climbing. Yeah.
Climb, you go malchut.
Fine.
You hear malchut, and then eventually.
Yeah, but remember, you're going lamata within lamata because you're davening,
yes,
and you're evoking the highest levels, and you're traveling downward, but you're doing it within yourself.
And then there's a certain point in davening, and maybe it'll be later, that we have to lower the lowest and start climbing up the rung, and
I don't know. We'll get there. I'm fine if I can master this. I'd be in good shape. You mastered this already?
If I know this is a roadmap for that.
Well, you see, you're talking about sense, and we're talking about avodah. So maybe you should try to work on this now. That's where the Rebbe wants us to talk. If the Rebbe said this moment right now in front of you, you'd ask him, what are you going to do in 5 years from now? He'll say, why don't you do this first? And then we'll get there. Why are you so impatient? I think you'll do very well, especially in month of Elul, if you just focused on Baruch Shomer and Yotzer, and the rest you do the usual lip service. That would be a ready achievement. Right. Hazaza. Right, like tshuva from the word, from B'shait, what's the expression there? Tshuva, ein ker. What's the expression? B'shait echad. But there's another. Yeah.
Well, a question on that very last line. Adon Ozenu, that it should have the impact, as you're saying, this whole idea of how this transcendence impacts our lives. It comes down to Adon Ozenu, and he says that it should give us koach and strength to go out from shiflus to richos.
Right.
The question is, I always thought shiflus was a state that we don't want to go out of, that we want to maintain it.
No. Shiflus, actually the word...
Malchus said, shuffle
First,
I can understand, but shiflus.
First of all...
Shiflus is something cultivating yourself. You want to maintain in your life.
Remember, let's not get stuck in language here. Some words are used in different contexts. Sometimes shuffle is actually used as the most negative way. An onav is healthy, a shuffle is not healthy. An onav is a humble person, a shuffle is a person of low self-esteem. Just for the record. So that's another way to use it. When David uses shuffle and bottle, right, so there's an element of that. There's a stage where you need to have that type of sense of humility. He's not saying get out of humility. He's saying get out of your lowliness. Here, I would translate lowliness.
It's a different connotation.
Right. And in general, just for the record, remember at the end of the day, avodah always consists of iskafia and isabcha. There's always a level of where you're sensing. Remember, it's all ava and yira. It's all love and respect. So there's one element where there's a closeness, there's an element of distance. That's not the distance he means here. It's essentially the recognizing that we are, as the Alter Rebbe says, to know how small you are and how great you can become. There's certain meditation contemplations focus on the distance, and there's certain contemplations that focus on the closeness. It all depends which part of the Avodah you're talking right now. Here, transcendence in general is not, I wouldn't call the word distance, but it's a certain element of mystique, mystery, God's distance from us. Distance as in, not distance as in as beyond us. And here's also distance could also be galus or anything that we sense that, There was someone once by Tkiyah Shofar, the Frierdiker Rebbe used to cry a lot by Shofar. Later years, he didn't blow shofar; he only said the blessings. But there was a man there, a yeka background, and he sees I was crying like a little child. He didn't stop crying. And he turned to someone and said, "Why is he crying? He has a beautiful wife, beautiful children, beautiful sons-in-law. Look, a nice house. What's he crying about?" So that's like Mamala Kalam. Mamala Kalam doesn't understand why you'd cry if everything is fine. But he's crying. But if you know about Elokus that's beyond existence, there's a lot to cry about. That's something that most people don't, you need to learn chassidus for that.
Is that the answer the man said to the part? Or was
No, I'm explaining it. He just told the story. That's what.
Who told that? That's a great point.
I heard the story from someone who was there. Why is he crying? So most of us cry when we're in pain or we're lacking something. Why did Rebbe Rashab cry when he went in at 45-year-old to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, Vayera Elov Hashem, that God revealed himself to Avram, and why is he not revealing himself to me? What was he crying about? So I remember once there's the answer that Tzemach Tzedek said when a Jew is 90, a tzaddik, a Jew, at 99 years old, decides he's going to be mal himself, can circumcise himself, he's worthy of God revealing himself. But the Rebbe focused often on the question itself. A child is crying why God doesn't reveal himself. Not because I don't have a candy, or because we're in Golis, or there's a pogrom, or because there's a disaster. Why is God not revealed? Listen, if someone asks you, why should we want Mashiach today? Remember, there's also Mereish Surim, Arenu, Tzemach Tzedek compares it to Mashiach. He says, Malchus is nailed, Mashiach is in bet in Malchus. That's how he compares it. Yeah. So if someone asks you what's wrong, the Gemara says, according to Shmuel, that Rambam brings it, Ayin Beis Yemei Mashiach le'elam hazeh el shibud malchus b'lvad, or Ayin Beis elam hazeh le'yemei Mashiach. No difference between today and Mashiach, only our subordination to kings, to leaders. What is the Shibud Malchus besides paying taxes and sometimes a parking ticket? So you could argue this is Mashiach's times. In a way, it is in that sense of it, but not in the sense of Gili Elokus. See, when the Rebbe yelled and screamed why you can't say that the 6-day war or Israel is Aschalta de Gula, what was his main thing? Besides the Rambam says, Geula means you need to have a Beis Hamikdash, you need to keep his goles, and not beruchnis. We're talking here physical. And there were those that said it's a stepping stone. There were those that said it's actually a stage in Geula. There's Rav Kook and all the others. The Rebbe was very adamant against it. At the same time, the Rebbe was the one that said again and again that we're ikfus Mashiach and Gilei Chassidus, and we're tasting it, we're at the edge of it, it's Erev Shabbos, all the expressions. Whatever that. But definitely not Aschalta de Geula. The reason is because by the Rebbe, Geula doesn't just mean that you have comforts and no one's attacking you. Or that you could stand in Israel and have ice cream and be a Jew.
Why can we Aschalta? That's the thing.
But Geula means Gili Elokus. The reason we have a Beis Hamikdash and Kibbutz Gol is not because of technical things. Someone's going to go, so someone say, you know what? Let's go build a Beis Hamikdash now. We have Mashiach here. No, it goes the other way around. When the world is ready, then God says, build a Beis Hamikdash. It's not the building. The building is a reflection of a stage. So the understanding of Geula is not just a question of a technicality. Whether Jews are gathering back to Israel, it's a question of it's a ruchnis dikagolos. So when we say mipnei chateinu galinu martzenu, and the Jews in Israel say it, because of our sins we were exiled from Israel. How do you say that in Israel? What do you mean we're not exiled? We're here because you could be there and be in exile. Yeah. Because it's not, it's about Yerushalayim Shalmayel, Yerushalayim Shalmayel. You're not talking about technically. Obviously, it's a beautiful thing that Jews are there. Obviously, Eretz Yisrael is a blessed land and it's God's land and so on. The Rebbe gave all those, said the safest place on earth. Aschalta de Gul, the reason is ultimately number one, the Rambam. The Rebbe says no one disagrees with the Rambam.
But there has to be first being Beis Hamikdash in order to say Mashiach.
But that's not Aschalta de Gul is not my expression or yours. It's an expression in Chazal. There's opinions that say what's called what do they call it? Like what's the word?
The first raise in the life.
Yeah, there's an expression, right? And there's an expression, right? It'll come to me. It'll be in stages. But the Rambam, the Rebbe brings all this and says the Rambam kima. There's another expression. Kima is not. But bottom line is the Rambam Paskin is not like that, and not like that opinion. That's the bottom line. That's the most important aspect. There are Chazal that say that that's possible. There's also Chazal that say that But the Rambam Paskin is not like that, and the Rebbe goes. So, I have one Rebbe.
I know, but
okay.
It's possible that
so you can go with Rav Kook's approach. The Rebbe went adamantly against it. I mean, as I said, I have one Rebbe.
It's a legitimate discussion between two giants.
In my opinion, according to the Rebbe, it's not legitimate. No, I would not say that at all. That's your way of looking at it. I would adamantly disagree, because let's put it this way: is it like saying the Rambam paskins one way? Can you say a Rav Kook because he's a gadol is pasking another way?
It's not pasking another way. He also knew the Rambam.
But so what is he doing? Is he pasking another way or not pasking another way? Yes, he's overruling the Rambam. He says that's different now. He's not overruling the Rambam. So how do you explain Rav Kook?
You can learn within the Rambam.
You can't.
He used the word Aschalta de Gul on the Friedrich Rebbe. I wonder if there's a coincidence.
It's expression. We're talking here. The Rebbe's adamance in this is very strong. It wasn't just a matter of a few opinions. Very strong. And I think fundamentally it's also a major difference. That it's not just a technicality. That's why I'm so adamant about it, because it's a major difference of how you look at the world right now and how you look at Jews. So if Rav Kook created a movement that was bringing Jews that were not yet know what Geula is to Geula, then I'd say to him he was maybe a scholar. He's a scholar, but he's not a Rebbe. He didn't understand the generation. What he did was, you could argue, actually undermine, because he created a certain legitimacy to secularism. I understand I read very well what he said, that it's one step and then comes the next step. He said stronger words. He said that even playing soccer on Shabbos in Israel is like a step to the Geula. Because you have Jews in Israel at least. Because they're setting the stage for the Geula. But the bottom line is, what is the result? Forget about whether you can read a Chazal like this. To me, the difference between a leader and a Talmud Chacham is what Rav Soloveitchik was by the Rebbe when he turned 80. So on the way back, Rabbi Schechter, who was one of his students and came with him, asked him, so what did he see? And how's the Rebbe changed from when he met him the last time? So you know what he answered? He says, yes, he became from a Talmud Chacham, he's now a Nasi, B'Yisrael. And he said that the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu, when he came down from the mountain the first time, he was a Talmud Chacham. He was a scholar. He learned Torah with God. And he came down the second time, he was a leader, because he had prayed for the Jews. And when did his face shine? According to most opinions, was after the Luchas Shniyas, Yom Kippur. Because now he's a leader. So the Karni Hoy, that he couldn't look at his face, came from the working on saving the Jews, not on teaching them.
It became Malchus.
So my point is like this. With all due respect to Rav Kook and others, Rav Kasha has a whole book called Exalted the Gula, or Tkuf Agdela. And they may have been scholars, and they were scholars, I have no doubt about it. But a leader is another thing than a scholar. The problem with a scholar opposed to a leader is a leader also understands the long-term consequences. A scholar can give you a true Torah idea. Yeah, I'm not saying Rav Kook doesn't base it on Mamar Chazal. But the question is the consequence, and which is why I understand how the Rebbe was so adamant against it, was the consequence was, how do you look at the world today? You know, and ultimately, do you cry over this situation we're in? Or do you say it's a schal gula and it's a joy? And I think if you don't know how to cry, you can't really be makar of the world, to Elokus and to God and to the Geula. That would be my bottom line. So, on one hand, yes, it has a lot of simonim and a taste, and yes, we have to thank God for the blessings of prosperity. But I think the Rebbe also understood the distance from godliness. And maybe Rav Kook didn't understand that. I would not say Rav Kook necessarily was as holy as a Rebbe. He was a scholar, he was a great scholar. And that maybe requires someone that has a sense of maybe this richuk and shiflus. And that's why the Rebbe would not want to call it a geula, because then you take away from that element. Anyway, bottom line is, it doesn't even matter. I'm just trying to explain it. You want to chalk it up, so you might as well chalk up. I could chalk up with the Rebbe and all other people that he disagreed with. Huh? Anyway, let's I did a review of chapter 74. It was pages Kuf Lamed 138 through 140.